Parker.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. May I also congratulate you on your reappointment to your current role. Not quite the same role, but similar to the original role that you had in the last Parliament, so thank you. Mr Speaker, I want to refer to the issue of compliance costs in relation to audit. The Labour Party supports this bill, but I do still harbour a concern that I discussed the other day in relation to some of the securities legislation about the cost of raising money for new ventures. The Auditor Regulation External Reporting Bill applies, amongst other things, in situations where the entity that is being audited is an issuer. And an issuer is, at law, someone who's issuing securities to the public. It might be raising money through selling shares. They might be issuing debenture stock. And these are important things that we need in order to expand our economy. And in particular, the issue that vexes me in New Zealand is the cost of raising private capital for equity ventures. Small businesses in New Zealand face very large costs relative to the size of their small business when they take the step of expanding beyond the shores of New Zealand into overseas markets. That's often taken at a time in New Zealand when these organisations are quite small by international scales, because their specialised good or the service that they might be selling might be quite small in market terms in a little place like New Zealand. So whereas if they were in a country like Australia or United States or an Asian country where they've got many more millions of people, they can expand gradually in their home market before having to expand offshore. In New Zealand, those companies that want to take their business further have to expand into export markets at an early stage, and that's an expensive and risky thing to do. And in order for them to achieve that by not putting all of their own personal assets at risk, they normally have to get more money into their company. And in order to do that, they have to comply with our securities legislation, which includes compliance with the rules relating to audits. The financial reporting standards in New Zealand and around the world have become hideously complex in recent years. Beg your pardon? Yes, well, I hope that you'll be convinced, Ms Shanks. I look forward to you acknowledging this issue, and because I know you're expert in these matters, being a qualified accountant and auditor, I expect. But the cost of audits has grown very, very significantly in the last 2 decades.
Rip-off.
Well, actually, someone said rip-off. I actually don't think it is a rip-off. I think it's just compliance with increasingly complex requirements of accounting standards and audit standards. And I question whether all of those complexities are justified. I don't think they are. I think that we're making the same mistake now in respect of accounting standards that we in the legal fraternity have made in respect of legal court rules and processes, which have become so hideously complex. The compliance cost is becoming disproportionate to the benefit that accrues from the additional complexity. Now, there is no doubt that we need to have standardised accounting rules. There is no doubt that we need to have standardised audit rules. Just like there's no doubt that we need to have standardised rules relating to the conduct of legal proceedings, or to the sort of things that have to be disclosed to people when they're borrowing money. So I'm not arguing against standardisation of rules, but I am arguing against overly complex rules. And we now have reached the point where accounting standards have become so technical that most people can't understand a set of financial statements when they read them, because they're no longer simple. Well, my colleague says there are financial literacy issues. Well, there are, but they're made more difficult by issues being too complex for most people to understand. You used to be able to read a set of accounts and there would be a profit and loss account, a profit and loss statement, and there would be a balance sheet, as they were then called. And they weren't perfect, but most people could understand them. Now to read a set of financial statements requires you to flick backwards and forwards to notes from the accounts, and you even have to report on things that are completely, or it seems that you have to report on things that are completely irrelevant to the state of affairs that's being reported upon. So you see notes in accounts saying things like, we have no exposure to foreign exchange risk. Well, if there's no exposure to foreign exchange risk, why do you have to report upon it? It's a nonsense. It's just an additional complexity that people have to fight their way through to read. It's one line. Well, okay, that's one line, that's true, but there are 50 examples of that. Maybe not 50, but there are many, many examples of that, so that now financial statements are very difficult for people to read and understand, and therefore they're put to the cost often of trying to having to use an intermediary who they have to pay when they ought to be able to read these things for themselves. In addition to that, the company that's coming to comply with these rules is having to use accountants when they would otherwise be able to do a lot of it internally. And additionally, in respect of when they do use an accountant, that accountant, the time spent by that accountant on the job is much longer than used to be the case, and of course they have to charge for that time, and therefore the cost of it to the enterprise is higher. And that's true both in respect of the accounting standards that then have to be audited by the audit. So the audit that takes place of the financial statements, which are themselves more complex than they need to be, is itself in the audit phase more complex than it needs to be, and therefore more costly. And it really is a muddle. It really is a muddle. That's right. It starts to hurt your head. And when I see here that we are in clause number 88, I think it was from memory, clause 88, the functions of the External Reporting Board include standard setting. So clause 88 says that the functions of the External Reporting Board, which has some control over how audits are carried out, includes the board has functions which are set out in a new Part 3, which is substituted by this clause 88. And clause 24, as inserted by that part, by that clause 88. Clause 24 says that the board has the following functions, and it says to prepare and, if it thinks fit, issue financial reporting standards for the purposes of the Act. Now, we need to make sure that the people that are on the External Reporting Board are practical. You know, rather than forever writing new and ever more complex rules. This is a problem that we have in regulation throughout the economy. People who are the regulators want perfection. Perfection costs too much. Actually, what we need is practical protections rather than perfection, and therefore we need to make sure that the people that are on these external reporting boards aren't trying to eliminate risk. We can't eliminate risk. We can just prudently minimise risk by giving prudent levels of information to people. Well, we're into alliteration in the Labour Party this week, and I'm quite happy to talk about the P's. Mr. Speaker, so I really do think that the functioning of this legislation does rely upon how technical the standards become, and it's going to be very important that the External Reporting Board has an eye on minimising that. I want to say something else about limitation of liability. I know another member is going to develop this. I do think it's time that we actually considered, and it's a difficult issue, whether we need to have joint and several unlimited liability in respect of auditors and audit firms. We have similar issues in some other practices like law, where we still have joint and several liability for most partnerships. And I think we need to consider whether that's right. In practice, what it does is it forces very big insurance premiums upon audit firms, which are passed on to the person buying the audit service, that are passed on to the people that we're actually trying to protect here, the people who are investing in companies and the companies that are raising money. And we need to keep those costs moderate, and this is another area where costs are getting out of control because insurance premiums are getting too high because the level of risk that auditors are facing is too high, in part because of the complexity of the things that they're having to require audits against, and in part because of joint and several unlimited liability. And I think we need to consider that. It's not an easy issue because there is a need to have some proper levels of accountability and risk for auditors, to hold them accountable for when they don't do their jobs properly. So I'm not going to pretend it's an easy job to get that one right, but we need to consider it. And in any event, there are ways around it at the moment through trusts and things to protect assets. So to a certain extent, the joint and several liability in respect of all assets is illusory. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Peter Sam Rotowing.